There's a hole in Antarctica that every nation on Earth has signed a pact to keep it hidden. A secret so forbidden that World War III won't start until one breaks this silent oath. What lies beneath doesn't just steal minds, it rewrites reality. December 2015. Investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howie's inbox blinks. An email from Brian, a US Navy flight engineer with an Antarctic service medal, detonates. They told us it was an air sampling station. They lied.
During an emergency medevac crisis, to speed up their trip, the crew flew across that no-fly zone and apparently saw what they were not supposed to see.
But there's more. 15 scientists vanish for 2 weeks, return hollow, trembling, gear quarantine, their faces like they'd seen God or the devil.
It was something I had never seen before, and something had scared those people to the point that they were almost scared of, frightened to the point of not moving.
Their sheer terror was palpable, an unspoken understanding that what they witnessed defied explanation. Men in suits replace NDAs with threats. You did not see what you saw. You will not talk about this.
And he said, okay, gentlemen, what you saw, you did not see. You were not over that area, and you will not ever talk about this again.
This isn't science fiction. It's testimony. Remember Buzz Aldrin's 2016 tweet? We are all in danger. It is evil itself. It was dismissed as fatigue. Now, proof. The Antarctic ice sheets hold secrets older than human civilization, but sometimes they bleed through the cracks of routine. Brian's description of pre-flight rituals reads like clockwork. Pre-dawn wake-ups, logbook checks, fuel calculations. But Antarctica doesn't respect routine. C-130 crews are the lifeline of Antarctic operations. Their days revolve around cargo drops, medevacs, and resupply runs. Mundane, predictable, until they're not. A sudden medevac reroute forces the crew to violate a no-fly zone near the South Pole, a decision that will unravel everything they thought they knew about this frozen continent. We got a change of mission. 3 words. Change of mission. That pivots this story from logistics to lore. What begins as a standard medevac morphs into a violation of orders. Why? Because beneath the ice lies a structure the size of a football field.
Unfold everything that happened.
Our mission was just a science resupply somewhere out on the western side of the continent. So it was just a short flight, probably an hour and a half, hour, 45 minutes to that science party that had been put out prior. We got a change of mission when we had gone up to operations, and they were told that our crew was going to take one of our model aircraft, and we were going to fuel it up, max out the gas, and fly to South Pole. And then from there, we were going to top off the fuel and then fly to Davis for a medevac that some person had become injured and needed to be taken off the continent immediately.
And what happened?
So we got airborne, and everybody knew there was an air sampling station that way because we were briefed every time prior to our deployment that this was the no-fly zone because it was labeled as a air sampling station and that we weren't to fly over it. So as a crew, we decided that we would take that direct route to Davis instead of deviating 20 miles around that air sampling, which is approximately what they required us to do if we were to have to go in that direction. So we were taking off, we were climbing, and about 5 to 10 miles out, somebody decided to look out the window instead of looking at their instruments and the radar the navigator does, and somebody said, hey, there's this big dark spot out here. And so we ended up flying not directly over it, but somewhat offset so that we could look out the left side of the aircraft. And it was down at about a 45-degree angle, and there was this large opening in the ice where this air sampling station was supposed to be.
How big do you estimate it was, and did it look like it was somewhat structured?
I estimated that you could have at least flown one of our aircraft into it. So the wingspan of our aircraft is 135, 138 feet wide. So it would have had to have been large enough to accommodate that wingspan, but it was probably more of the size of a football field.
C-130 engines hum with routine until they don't. The crew's decision to cut across the no-fly zone near the South Pole wasn't recklessness, it was necessity. A medevac hanging in the balance. But Antarctica trades in secrets, not mercy. At 20,000 feet, the anomaly glared back. A jagged maw in the ice, artificially geometric. Football field size. Ramped. Engineered. This wasn't an air sampling station. Tracks led to it. Human tracks. Snowcats, supply routes. But here's the kicker. When debriefed, the crew wasn't handed NDAs. They were stalked by omission. And what Brian's crew uncovered next? It makes a hole the size of a football field seem almost ordinary. Because after that flight, it wasn't just the ice that held secrets. It was the people. Scientists who vanished. Faces that returned hollow. And a cover-up that went far deeper than anyone expected.
We landed in McMurdo. They had an ambulance waiting for us for the patient. We shut down engines. They offloaded him onto another aircraft. Another crew had been waiting to take him back to Christchurch, New Zealand. So they offloaded him. Then we put the airplane to bed. My job as the engineer was to post-flight the aircraft and make sure that it was okay to fly, or if anything was wrong with it, I had to write up the discrepancies and give it to our managed control people so that they could fix the aircraft for the next mission, for the next crew. So we went back up, everybody got in the van and drove back up to McMurdo, got out, and we had to go back into operations, or the Puzzle Palace as we call it, and we were told that the crew had to wait here instead of doing the normal debrief with our operations guy and then going back to get something to eat and do whatever, and then started going into crew rest for our next mission. So we were told to wait in the conference room, so we all went in the conference room, and about 5-10 minutes later, this gentleman walked in that nobody knew, wasn't part of the squadron, but he was dressed in the regular green fatigues that everybody wore down there when they weren't on flight status. He's kind of looking at all of us, and he says, okay, so you guys went through the no-fly zone north of Pole and violated that airspace restriction. And our aircraft commander says, yeah, we did. We thought it was prudent that we not waste any time and shave some time off our flight time to get to the medevac that was at Davis. We were told it was important and not to waste any time. So we made the decision to fly over that air sampling station. The gentleman basically kind of looked around at all of us sitting at the table and looked at each one of us, and he said, okay, gentlemen, what you saw, you did not see. You were not over that area, and you will not ever talk about this again. Okay, and that's all he said. There was no repercussions or any threat like, okay, and if you do talk about it, this or this is going to happen. Okay, and we all sat there kind of dumbfounded. It's like, okay, all right. So what did we see? So none of us thought anything of it other than this big hole in the ground. Okay.
In the ice.
In the ice, exactly. So it was like, so why is this guy making a big deal about it now and saying that we can't talk about it and we didn't see it?
Debriefings in Antarctica are routine until they become rituals of erasure. Brian's crew returns from the medevac mission, adrenaline still crackling from the ice hole sighting. But Antarctica trades in secrets, not closure. You did not see the ice hole. 7 words that transform a debriefing into a crime scene. No paperwork, no NDAs, just a verbal scalpel excising reality. The absence of NDAs is its own smoking gun. Coercion thrives in shadows. Ask yourself, why verbal threats over legal contracts? Because some truths are too volatile for paper. When the crew later hears scientists whisper about visitors at South Pole's bar, the puzzle snaps into focus. Non-human visitors. Silent agreements. A continent playing host. What the crew learns next will make the ice hole feel trivial. Scientists who vanish for 2 weeks and return fundamentally altered.
Now, can you unfold what may be a link exactly to that hole with the strange story of the disappearing scientists? the National Science Foundation scientists?
Well, the standard operating procedure, and all the science parties know, I mean, it's part of their training, their survival training, is that every day they have to check in on radio. And they would call in at a certain time every day and give a status report or a situation report. And they were supposed to do that. That was mandatory. If McMurdo had not heard from them in 2 days, then we were supposed to try and initiate contact. So we had to go back out. Since we were the crew that had put them in originally, we knew the area, we knew where the crevasse fields were, so that we wouldn't end up landing in a crevasse field and ending up losing the airplane. So we were the ones designated to go back out. So we flew around the camp, did a circle a couple times, but there was no movement. There was no people moving around in the camp. Usually when a C-130 flies over, you can't miss that sound, and people come out to see, hey, our mail's here, or our milk's here, or something like that. But there wasn't anybody to be seen. So we ended up and made the approach into the skiway there and landed, taxied up to the camp, and we didn't know how long we were going to be there, so we shut our engines down. And some of us got out and tried to find some of the science party that was there. We couldn't find anybody. We were told, okay, you guys, you need to go back out to that science camp and pick up those people, because they finally called in and said they wanted to be picked up. They didn't even wait for the cargo to be loaded, because normally the cargo gets loaded first and then we bring the passengers on. They all, approximately 15 of them, just basically moved as quick as they could onto the aircraft and sat down in the seats.
And at that point, Brian, you and the crew were so baffled because not one of those scientists that had been missing would talk to any of you, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to talk about. None of them would say a single word to us. I mean, my loadmaster, on the way back, I went back up to my seat and got strapped in, and my loadmaster continued to try and find out, talking to different people, trying to find out what went on, and none of them would say anything. But they all had that frightened look on their face.
What do you think was happening to them at that point?
I think they were in some kind of shock. Maybe like a post-traumatic stress syndrome or something like that, PTSD. I mean, it was something I had never seen before, and something had scared those people to the point that they were, almost scared of, frightened to the point of not moving.
Brian's crew arrives at the Mary Bird land camp to find tents erect, snowmobiles parked, coffee cups half full, but no scientists, just wind howling through empty Quonset huts. When the crew finally retrieves the scientists, their faces tell the story. Wide eyes, trembling hands, lips sealed tighter than a cryogenic vault. These weren't men. They were husks. The scientist gear was quarantined, not incinerated, studied. Ask yourself, why preserve equipment but silence witnesses? Because some contagions aren't viral, they're mimetic. Years later, rumors surfaced that the quarantine gear was shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, home to America's most infamous foreign material lab. Coincidence or confession? What the crew learns next chills deeper than Antarctic ice. A debriefing with men in suits who speak in threats, not orders.
Explain what happened to the scientists and the gear. It's separate tracks.
Right. The Air New Zealand Army was in charge of the cargo movement on the ice. So they took it over up into McMurdo, and it was put in a separate building all by itself, and it was quarantined. No one was allowed to go in there, and it was to stay there until it was put on another airplane back to Christchurch, New Zealand.
This is all the gear that was there at Marie Byrd Land with
yes.
the time of the scientists going missing.
Right. All of their stuff that we brought back out of that camp was quarantined in a building. Now, in this building, there wasn't anything else. It wasn't shared with anything. It was an empty, basically Quonset hut type storage building, and it was the only thing in there. It was locked. Nobody was allowed to go in there. We were told, don't go near that stuff. And we said, why? And it's like, we were just told it's quarantined. Don't go near it.
Didn't you have some more people in suits show up to talk with you guys? And you also had more discussions with people in rumors about this.
We were debriefed again. So we were taken in the same room in the operations building, and we were sat down. And this time, two guys showed up. They were not dressed in fatigues. They were dressed in what I would consider like a suit type apparel. The only thing that was different was that they didn't have the regular suit type shoes but they were wearing some type of cold weather boot on. And so we were told the same thing. Okay. You guys are not going to say anything about this incident, that you didn't find that those scientists at Marie Birdland when you went to pick them up, and that nothing was going to be said about it. Okay. Again, we weren't asked to sign anything like the first time, and so
debriefings in Antarctica follow a script until the scriptwriter is inhuman. Brian's crew returns from Mary Birdland, their nerves still raw from retrieving the silent, hollow-eyed scientists. But in this theater of ice, the final act belongs to men who don't wear uniforms. They wear power. You are not to talk about this incident. No paperwork, no raised voices, just a blade of implication. We've already erased it. The absence of NDAs isn't oversight, it's arrogance. Verbal threats leave no trail. Ask yourself, who silences witnesses without paperwork? Entities above governments. Entities that own patents on reality. Years later, Buzz Aldrin would tweet, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself," after a South Pole evacuation. Coincidence? Or a breadcrumb for those connecting dots across decades? What comes next makes the suits look quaint. A final flight over the Transantarctic Mountains, where silver discs perform maneuvers no human pilot could survive.
And so on that, we get to 95 to 96, and you all are doing some of these runs, and talk about what happened over the Transantarctic Mountain.
One of the trips that we're going from McMurdo to Pole was just a regular, what we called a milk run, and we were taking people and cargo up there. And so normal route was to take off from McMurdo, fly over Minna Bluff, which is one of the landmarks that we knew we were on course, and then fly to the east side of the Transantarctic Mountains, which happened to be actually almost over the entire length of the Beardmore Glacier, because the Beardmore Glacier runs alongside the Transantarctic mountain range. We were coming up past the Transantarctics, and we were just east of that mountain range, and we're probably around 25,000 feet or so altitude. And one of the loadmasters in the back, he was looking out the window, and he's like looking down the Transantarctics, and seeing what he could see, and he saw some glimpses of light, reflections of something. And he called me and said, "Hey, Ange, come back here and look at this." So I got out of my seat and went back there and looking out the window, and I said, "What are you looking at?" And he says, "Look at that down there." And he says, "See those little flashes?" And I started looking around. "No, I don't see anything." And he says, "Oh, no, over here. Go over to the left a little bit. See on the top by the mountain peaks?" And I'm looking. I says, "Oh yeah, I see them now." And I told him, he says, "What do you think those are?" And he says, "I don't know." And all of a sudden, there was a group of maybe 4 or 5 of these glints, and they were right over the top of the Transantarctics, and you could see them reflecting the light. And I got to looking at them a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and they started becoming bigger, which to me was an indication that they were climbing in altitude, but they still stayed over the Transantarctics. And I'm looking at them, and it's like, that looks like discs, and I kind of jokingly said, flying saucers. And he looked at me and he kind of smiled and he goes, "Well, that's what I thought too, but I wasn't going to say anything because I thought maybe you think I was nuts or something." I says, "No, that's what it looks like." And then the formation of the discs, the lead one, the one in the front, would make a dash toward this other mountain peak. And then the other ones would all follow, and they would all stop next to the lead disc. And then they would dart off in another direction. One would go, and then the other ones would follow. And then, surprisingly enough, one of them took off that was in the back of the group, wasn't the leader. He took off in one direction, and 2 of the discs went with him, and the others went the opposite direction and the entire time over the Transantarctics. And it was kind of unusual because at no time did they ever approach our aircraft, or did they ever venture over the Beardmore Glacier. that duration for that sighting, which is the first one, I would say was probably about 10 minutes. They were kind of pacing us, going with us, but they were staying over the Transantarctics. And then we got to the end of the Transantarctic mountain range, and we were over the polar plateau, and they stayed over the Transantarctics, and we continued on to South Pole Station to do our mission.
C-130 engines thunder with routine until the ice below whispers secrets in a language of light. Brian's crew banks over the Transantarctic mountains, a jagged spine dividing east from West Antarctica. Below, the Birdmore Glacier sprawls, a frozen river wider than cities. Above, silver disks, no radar blips, no radio warnings, just impossible physics. Flight paths here are memorized like hymns. Minna Bluff to South Pole, 3 hours 10 minutes. Fuel calculations precise to the gallon. The discs didn't obey. They dance, banking at 90-degree angles, halting mid-air, mirroring the C-130's path, then rewriting it.
Look at that down there. Oh, no, over here. Go over to the left a little bit. See on the top of by the mountain peaks? And I'm looking, it says, oh yeah, I see them now.
Not machines, predators. 5 silver orbs pivot in unison. A choreography no human pilot could survive. G-forces that would liquefy lungs. The discs never crossed the Beardmore. A silent treaty or geofence truth? Ask yourself, why guard empty ice? Because some borders aren't on maps. Years later, declassified NORAD logs reveal thermal blooms under these peaks, pulses matching the disk's 1985 appearance. Coincidence or check-ins? They weren't surveying, they were herding. What comes next defies flight logs. The discs dance over the Transantarctics? A countdown. Thermal blooms pulse beneath glaciers, ice cores humming with ancient protocols. Why herd a C-130? Because some paths aren't navigational. They're sacramental.
Contact actually started on Friday, so we were doing this talk at the restaurant and
Thursday night,
which was contact hadn't even started yet. So I came home on Sunday and went to work on Monday, and I'm sitting at my desk and
you're in a aerospace related company where you do not normally get any outside public phone calls, and that you have to have a clearance to work there.
Right, exactly. And a phone call came in to me about 10 o'clock in the morning on my personal cell phone. And I didn't recognize the number, but I thought maybe it was my nephew or somebody that was calling me. So I answered the phone and I said, hello, and the voice on the other end, which was a male voice, said, is this Brian? I says, yeah, this is Brian. Who am I talking to? He says, well, there's some people that are kind of upset that you've been talking about certain things, and they would rather you not discuss any of that stuff that you were talking about. I says, I don't understand. Well, what are you talking about? Well, we know that you and your nephew and Linda Moulton Howe were having a dinner on Thursday, this last Thursday at during the contact in the desert conference, and that you were out in the parking lot until about 12:30 talking. I says, well, there was not anybody else around. How did you know that occurred? And the voice on the other end said, well, what we do is what we do, and we pretty much know everything that goes on. I said, really? Yeah. And they said, the people that I'm associated with really don't want you talking anymore about the missing scientists that you had encountered years back. I said, well, how do you know about that? And the guy said, same thing. He says, we pretty much know everything. I said, okay. And he said, so stop talking. So I'm looking at my cell phone, and the number comes up, and I'm looking at the phone number, and I'm going, I don't recognize this phone number. So I was at my computer, and I quickly went in, and Googled the search for that phone number, and it came back as the general phone number of the NSA in Fort Meade, Maryland. And I went, oh, really? This is kind of scary. Somebody is surveilling me, and they know what went on at a private conversation that we had last Thursday. So I called my nephew and told him what happened, and then obviously he called you and told you that what had happened, and then I finally got a hold of you and told you what had happened.
Right. And I asked you, I said, is this a problem? Are you worried about a repercussion? And I'll never forget when you said, I'm never going to back off from talking with you or being able to talk about the missing scientists, the hole in the ice, the silver discs, what appears to be definitely be an alien presence in Antarctica. They never had me sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Right. That's exactly what I said. But you also asked me, you asked me, why do you think that they called you? And I says, well, I kind of have a gut feeling, Linda, that they were trying to send a message to you through me, because you really dig into everything. I mean, you get right down into the nitty gritty of the information. And I think in some way that they were trying to send a message to you, to leave the subject alone.
Antarctica doesn't forget. It archives. Brian's phone rings with the chill of a glacier calving. A voice slices through static. Stop talking. No demands. No warrants. The NSA's ghost call isn't a threat. It's a receipt. A receipt for truths too volatile for servers, too alive for paper. Ask yourself, why flex power over a retired engineer? Because some silences are ecosystems. The discs still dance over the Transantarctics. The ice hole still breathes. The scientist's gear still whispers in Wright-Patterson's vaults. And Brian? He's a living fossil in a war older than ice cores. A war where victory isn't secrecy, but erasure. Antarctica's greatest secret isn't buried. It's broadcast in thermal blooms under midnight suns, in hushed bars at Pole Station, in the static between classified and unknown. The crew's sin wasn't seeing, it was surviving. C-130s still ferry cargo across the Beardmore. Medevac still bleed through radios. But now, when crews bank over Minna Bluff, they check their six. For silver. For light. For the glacial certainty that some borders aren't on maps. They're alive.